Hello, you're about to watch the video lecture for Types of Films for Journalism 180, Introduction to Film at McHenry County College. Hello again, everybody. Hope you are doing well as always. I hope you're enjoying these video lectures, and we are going to get into a really fun topic today. We're going to get into what we call types of films or types of movies. But before I get into that, I wanted to let you know about a situation that happened in Southern California. Wendy Thrasher, she had her Nissan Cube stolen, which just on principle, that sounds kind of weird, and it's actually kind of funny. But it wasn't funny for Wendy because Penelope was in the Nissan Cube when it got stolen. And that's, of course, what caused her to be overly anxious about getting that vehicle back. And so she called local authorities to try to help her find her car. I should point out that Penelope was a 300-pound potbelly pig. Yeah, so put your mind around that. 300-pound pot-bellied pig inside of a Nissan Cube. Anyway, fortunately for Wendy and for Penelope, the perpetrators that stole the particular vehicle did not get very far. They got about 2 blocks down the street. They ended up crashing the vehicle into a lamppost, denting one of the fenders and knocking off one of the hubcaps. But fortunately, Penelope was okay, which is really great. We want to make sure that was all right. Now, upon further inspection, they really don't have any leads. They don't know what's going on. They have no idea who stole this particular vehicle, but they're certainly hoping that Penelope will squeal on them. It's a lot funnier when I wrote it, but anyway. Anyway, well, welcome back, and I hope you are getting something out of these video lectures as we go through the semester. And what we're going to hit on today is just another additive to what we've been talking about so far. Remember, we started with the physical properties. We have now moved to the structural side of things, and this is where we're going to go today. So I'm going to share my screen, as I always do, right? We've got my screen share. Where is it at? It's this one right here. And then we're going to go from the beginning. Where is that? Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so here's our agenda. This is what we're going to try to accomplish. Where are we? Well, remember, wherever you go, that's where you're at. And then what's your type? We'll find out what your type is, and then we'll finish up with what's up next. So we got a lot of cool stuff to accomplish here. So far this semester, this is pretty much how everybody's been, right? Kicking back, sipping on a juice box, maybe have sunglasses, that kind of thing, hanging on a lawn chair, kind of cool, right? And so we're past the midpoint of the semester, but we're still feeling pretty good, right, man? We're kicking back underneath an umbrella, everything like that. But the end is coming. And so this is how you're kind of feeling right now. Yeah, I'm ready. The end is coming. I got that. But of course, now a panic will start to sit in at some point. Panic will start to sit on, and you'll start to be chasing it and everything like that. So what do you do now? I want to take a couple of moments before we get into the material to help you through your time management. Make sure you're on top of everything. You're doing things when they're due. Don't putting them off. Not overlooking them. Everything like that. There is a phenomenon that hits every student at about right about the 12th, 13th week, or in a smaller semester in the 9th or 10th day. As we get closer to the end, it gets there. It affects everybody because you realize the end of the semester is closer than the beginning of the semester. Stuff that goes on. Just make sure you have a plan of attack, outline everything. If you get behind on something, let your instructors know. Send them an email, say, hey, I'm having these. Everybody's got life going on, so just make sure you do that so that you can alleviate some of the stress. Our class, we're planned out so that you know when everything is due. Hopefully that is keeping a little bit of anxiety down. But if it is not, please let me know, and we can definitely help you in any way that we can to help you be successful when the semester is over. Okay, so there's my public service announcement for today. Moving on. we're going to dive into the types of movies. And it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. As you can see, I'm sitting on a back lot right now, and we're going to talk about the various different types of movies. First off, I've got a couple of terms that, just like always, we've got a couple of terms coming your way. We'll revisit narrative. That was our last lecture. If you recall that one, we talked about the narrative fictional film. We also talked about the 4 S's along the way. Then we'll also talk about genres as well. So there's a lot of cool stuff that's coming your way as we go through this particular video. Okay, so terms to know. I got a couple of terms for you here. Not overly complex, not anything more than you guys have had in the past. The first one is called a feature film. A feature film. And what's a feature film? And that's a film that goes 60 minutes in length or longer. That's about as simple as it gets. As always, you know that when I give you a simple definition, there's a little bit more to that. And a feature film certainly has that. It's a simple definition, 60 minutes in length or longer. The Academy Award for Best Picture every year goes to a feature film. It does. It just simply does that. In the early days of movie going, in the golden age of Hollywood and the golden movie palaces that we had, what would go on is that evening you would have a feature presentation, but you would have several other things attached to it, such as maybe a serial, not what you have in the morning with milk on it, but an ongoing saga. You would have maybe a couple of short films. You might have a cartoon or two, something like that, and you would get to the feature presentation. It was designed that way. It was more of an event. You dressed up, everybody. It was an event when we went to see these movies. Nowadays, it doesn't quite work the same. You call your buddy up and you say, hey, you know, movie starts at 7:05. You get there, you get your 17 pounds of popcorn and your 50-gallon tank of soda pop, and then you sit down and you watch a movie. And then when you're done, you just go home and everything like that. So, but in the early days, the feature film was kind of it was the main attraction. And what the industry was looking for was, how do I know this is a main attraction versus a short film or something else? And the industry couldn't limit topics or genres or anything like that. They said, you know what, we'll make it 60 minutes in length or longer, and we'll just leave it. And kind of just like with Naismith, when he invented basketball, he had hung a basket on a balcony and it just happened to be at 10 feet and nobody thought to change it. And a feature film hasn't changed since that time. So it's always 60 minutes in length or longer. Usually your short films come in at 20, 25 minutes, simply because they try to make a very distinct difference between a feature and a short film. You have a category at the Academy Awards that's for short films, documentary, short subject, everything like that. So it does work, but a feature film is 60 minutes in length or longer. Okay, so that's your first term. The second and last term for today is actually, there's a lot to it. It's called a film movement, and there is actually a lot to this. It's a group of films sharing innovative styles or subjects that come from the same area over a set period of time, that go against the main film style of the same time. That's what a film movement is. And I'm sure that, you know, as you're writing it down, you're vigorously writing it down, you're thinking to yourself, okay, is this something that I really need to know? And actually, yes. When we look at the world of film movements are all over the place. The most creative minds in the world make these films, and they don't like to be pigeonholed, and they don't like to be restricted. And so what happens a lot of times is people try to do something new. They try to do something innovative. And when that happens, we get a lot of copycats. It's say, hey, that's a good idea. And all of a sudden you get 4 or 5 films that have the same innovative style, and now you get a shift in the actual process. And that's what a film movement is all about. So it's a very, very common experience in the world of film. And as we study films, it's actually a very important thing to understand. And that's why I wanted to talk about it today. So that's what a film movement is. It's a group of films that push against the main film style and possibly help it evolve. Okay. Now, we talked about narrative films and the 4 S's. And you remember what a narrative film is, right? It's driven by the story. Narrative and story are kind of the same thing. So we have that. And they evoke some sort of emotion. There's always a beginning, which is established the story and draws us in. Middle, character's progress toward a goal. And then end, where we have a resolution to the conflict. There is rising action, resolution to conflict, and we always have a variety of areas and sources they come from, but they're always considered fiction. So we got that. We got what an understanding of a narrative film. Now, when we look at a narrative film, however, we also like to do a couple of other things with it. Most notably, we like to categorize them. And when we categorize them, we actually put them into what we call a genre. Now, I'm focused on the American film right now. There is obviously lots of other film industries all over the world, but we're just going to focus on the American film right now. And a genre is that French term. And again, here comes the French. They're influencing another art form here. It is a film or a term that means films that share enough similar qualities that filmmakers and audiences recognize them as members of the same group. So genre is a grouping, but the grouping is made up of characteristics. Does that make sense to everybody? So we tend to put films into a group, and the reason we do that is because, first of all, we like order. A lot of people like order, so we like to do this sort of thing. The second thing is that when an audience is unfamiliar with a film, we want to know kind of where it falls. If it is a horror movie or if it's an action movie, we want to kind of know where it's at so we have an idea of what we're getting ourselves into. So with that in mind, what I'm about to do now is to dive in to the genres of American films. We're going to find out the types of American films. Now, as I go through them, I'm going to focus on the big six to start. These are the big six American genre films. I will give you the definition of it, and then what I'll do is I'll give you some characteristics, and then we'll kind of talk about how it's evolved over time. And to have a little fun with it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a picture of a film in that particular genre and see if you can guess it. If you can guess the film, that'd be cool. And see if you can guess the genre. That'd be even cooler. So let's see what we can do with that. All right, you ready? All right, here we go. First off, we're going to give you this picture right here. And most of you probably go, oh, it looks like De Niro in the front there. And it's like, wait, that's a bunch of Goodfellas. And that's exactly what that is. That's Goodfellas. It's a movie Goodfellas. And it was Martin Scorsese's masterpiece. And Goodfellas actually falls into a category we would like to call gangster. All right, so gangster. That's the first of the big six of American genres of film. So it's gangster. And a gangster film is a film that is basically, you don't want to necessarily call it a crime film. That's not really what it is. Basically what it is it's a film where somebody goes from nothing to everything in one generation. All right. So gangster films tend to do that. You don't want to come right out and say mafia films. You don't want to really say that or anything like that, but that's a lot of times where the flavor comes into those films. They usually show, a deep loyalty between characters, but they also tend to be very, very violent. And a lot of blood and guts, a lot of things like that. Goodfellas, of course, would fall into that category. A movie like The Departed would also fall into that category. Both of those films are from Martin Scorsese. Of course, the ultimate gangster film that almost everybody thinks about would be The Godfather, right? Godfather with Marlon Brando and all of those individuals, I would call that. And also Scarface is probably another film that comes into play. Say hello to my little friend. So we tend to give the gangsters the type of film that deals with probably illegal, not necessarily legal stuff, probably more illegal than legal. You're talking about drugs or prostitution or other things like that. And that's where the money is made. And so we see a small evolution in the gangster films over the years. When we think of movies like Godfather from 72 and 74, which Godfathers 1 and 2 were the first films to ever be Best Picture from original and sequel, the first time that ever happened. And so when we think about the gangster film, that's what we think of. And as we saw with the Goodfellas, and we also see with The Departed, we start to see a little bit more of a modern flavor to it. We also start to see films that kind of move a little bit. The Wolf of Wall Street, which again would be another Scorsese film, by the way. So he tends to fall into that category. He likes those films. He does a great job with those films. There was the Netflix one about the Irishman, so he tends to stay with that. Again, they deal with things that they're dealing with those illegal activities a lot of times. Now, I have a colleague that will shout at the top of the mountain that Goodfellas is the greatest film ever made. And I told him, I say, that's an awesome film, but there's another film that I actually think is probably just a tad bit better. And so we agree to disagree, but that's what the gangster film is. All right, so that's your first genre. Got that one? All right. Second genre of American film. Second one. First off, I'm going to put up a picture. Should be easy. Should be easy. You guys pick this one up? Yep. Yeah, that's a Western. Okay, that's a Western. Actually, that's from a classic Western. That's a clip from the movie Stagecoach. Now, the Western genre actually is one of the largest American genres. It's so large, it's actually broken into two halves. And we have what is called the traditional Western, and there you go. There's an individual you probably know, maybe widely considered as the greatest movie star of all time, and that was John Wayne, and he was in the movie Stagecoach. Anyway, the traditional Western has a couple of very distinct characteristics. One, it is set west of the Mississippi, which makes sense. If you look at, here we go, I'll give you geography, as I promised you all the classes. With geography, if you look at geography, the Mississippi River, which pretty much bisects the country, goes on the western side of Illinois. That's how Illinois kind of gets that curve a little bit, and it dumps down in the Gulf of Mexico. And so if you're looking at a map, everything to the left is the west, everything to the right is the east. So with a traditional Western, it is set west of the Mississippi. Sense. Because it's west, there's usually big open spaces. So the second characteristic the Western genre has is that there's a threat to civilization. You have people living out in the middle of the prairies. There's not much of a civilization, and so when you have somebody that is threatening that, then that's what we have. And then the third and final characteristic of a traditional Western is that there's always a reestablishment of law and order. Okay? Always a reestablishment of law and order. So when we watch these films, we get a chance to see the wide open spaces of the West. And then we also get a chance to see somebody kind of move in and kind of take it over. And then we see a response to that and reestablishment of law and order. It's a very, very popular. It was the most popular. The most films were made in the Western genre. Most of the people that were going to see movies were from an urban setting. So to see a rural setting, it was very, very popular. And also an individual like you have on screen there, good old John Wayne, was enough to bring you into the theaters. And so that's what made the Western genre so popular. Now, as time evolved, eventually you got what was called the revisionist type of Western. And the revisionist Western follows the very same setup that a traditional Western does. In other words, it gives us a set west of Mississippi, a threat to civilization, and reestablishment of law and order. So that is still consistent there. But what makes the revisionist Western slightly different from the traditional is that the revisionist Western tells the story from a different point of view. Okay, so a revisionist Western tells it from a different point of view. And in the old traditional Western, you had basically the guy with the white hat was the hero, and he took out the guy with the black hat, and then there we have it. Whereas the revisionist Western usually goes in different directions. And so why there was a shift, it was actually really, really kind of interesting. Much like what happened in Toy Story 2. If you ever saw Toy Story 2, Stinky Pete did not like Buzz Lightyear for a very specific reason. He didn't like him because he was a space toy. And that's exactly what happened here, is that the traditional Westerns, they started to run their course, and then the space program kind of took off in the 50s there. And so John Wayne was making other films, and so it kind of lost its luster. And so the revisionist Western was trying to rekindle that passion for the Western genre. And it did. It held for a little while, but eventually space and science fiction just took over, and the Western genre became kind of obsolete. We don't see them made very much anymore. They don't make a lot of Western films, but when they do, they usually do it at a high level. And earlier I mentioned to you that Goodfellas was one of my colleagues, you consider it the greatest film that was ever made. And I told him, I said, it's an excellent film. I really enjoyed it, but I'm not ready to anoint it as the greatest film ever made because there was a film that I felt was actually better. And it fell into this particular category, and that was the film Dances with Wolves. Dances with Wolves was a classic revisionist because instead of doing the old-fashioned style, what happens is Kevin Costner's character ends up befriending a group of Sioux Indians, and the story is told from their point of view. So unlike what we saw in the traditional Western with the revisionist of Dances with Wolves, it was told from a different point of view. And if you've watched the film, you know that better than 25% of the dialogue is in Lakota Sioux. So it's an entirely different approach. And it's a longer film, and that's what turns a lot of people off. But I consider it a pinnacle of the last 100 years of American cinema. And of course, my colleague will say, no, Goodfellas was better than Dances with Wolves. And then I always trump them with the simple fact that Goodfellas did not win Best Picture that year. The film that won, Dances with Wolves. So anyway, you would have to choose for yourself. But the Western genre was at the time the largest one. Now, there is a bridge between the two, between the traditional and the revisionist. And that's what we sometimes refer to as the spaghetti Western. Maybe you've heard of those. The spaghetti Westerns were a kind of a film movement from the 1960s there. And they were called spaghetti Westerns for a couple of reasons. One, they were made in Italy, which, well, Italy's known to make spaghetti. So there you go. So it was made that way. The second thing is that those films were relatively inexpensive to make. Rural Italy apparently looks like the Old West, so it worked out really nice. You had a little bit lower labor cost, everything. So much like spaghetti being a very efficient and inexpensive meal to make, the spaghetti Westerns were the same thing. And the spaghetti Western really hit its stride with a very, very talented director by the name of Sergio Leone. Sergio Leone made what was called the Dollars Trilogy, in which you had a fistful of dollars, and then for a few dollars more, and then perhaps the single greatest spaghetti Western film, maybe one of the best Western films ever made, which was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And so those films kind of bridge the gap there. Clint Eastwood kind of took the mantle over from John Wayne, and then eventually those films, they stopped making them. Dances with Wolves was one of only 3 films to ever be a Western Best Picture winner, or actually a Best Picture winner that was a Western. You had Cimarron in 1931, you had Dances with Wolves in 1990, and then a couple of years later, you had a movie called Unforgiven, which was done by the before mentioned Clint Eastwood. And so the Western genre is really cool. It's an acquired taste, though, folks. Some people love them. Some people go, it's just not for me. And it's kind of something that you have to experience in order to make a decision based on it. But there's your Western. So that was the second of the big 6 of the genres. All right, so number three, this one might be a little difficult. All right, so I'll give you that one there. Maybe you picked out the film. Maybe you did. How about the actor? Maybe you got the actor. And probably not going to figure out the genre. Well, first off, the genre was film noir. Okay, film noir, N-O-I-R, but it's pronounced as if there's a W. And again, it comes from our friends from across the sea in France, and it means black or dark. And film noir films tend to actually physically have that feeling. They're black or darker films. And the picture that I have up there is the actor is the great Humphrey Bogart. And the film that he is starring in that particular situation there is The Maltese Falcon. And film noir is different from gangster films. You see, with a gangster film, there's usually some sort of loyalty or some sort of family togetherness. With a film noir, that's not the case at all. It's usually individuals that are trying to get ahead. There is a lot of, many of the main characteristics are that you have double crossing, cruelty, lies, deception, deceit, things like that. People that are out for themselves. And those films tend to give us a little bit of a relief. I'm sorry, a release, or a kind of a glimpse into something that was not very common, things that we don't believe exist. When people shake hands and they say, I'm going to do something, and shake hands, you have their word that that's what they're going to do. Whereas with the film noir, guy's shaking a hand with his right, but he's got a knife in his left. And so that's where you hit that. And The Maltese Falcon may have been the pinnacle of that particular group. And you also have movies, of course, like Casablanca, which stars, of course, Humphrey Bogart there. You could also look at maybe a film like The Untouchables. We see those a little bit more. If you're going modern day, however, a lot of times we don't really go with the film noir. We kind of have a film noir-esque type films where we put a little bit of dark lighting or something, but we really don't go in that direction. However, I am one that would actually believe that The Dark Knight fits into film noir. Not only is it because it's the dark and the black and everything like that, but the entire process is very consistent. If you saw The Dark Knight, it's very consistent with what film noirs are. You usually tend to have people doing things that are, they're at odds with one another, and there's usually not a happy ending. And I'm not ruining The Dark Knight by telling you that. It's not really the ending that we would have liked, but it is an ending, and it does give us the kind of the resolution of the conflict, even though it may not be the film that we were anticipating. So that's what a film noir is, film noir. So that's the third one. All right. Number 4, this one's easy. This one's easy. You should get this right off the bat, right? If you said Grease, you would be correct. And if you said musical, you'd be doubly correct, right? So correct times 2. Grease was a film from 1978, starred Olivia Newton-John, Jeff Conway, Didi Khan, and of course the great John Travolta. And Travolta, I mean, the name just sounds cool, right? It just does. Travolta just sounds cool. And that was back with the T-Birds and the Pink Ladies in the musical. And we all got to go back to Rydell High in the 1950s. What is the main characteristic of a musical? Well, there's only really one, and that is that the majority of the information is presented through song. So unlike all other genres, the musical, that's really where it gets the main focal point. And that's obvious because it's named after that. So with a musical, as long as that's the only characteristic, it becomes one of the most versatile genres because you can go pretty much anywhere with it. You can go to high school, such as Grease, right, with the musical. You could go with a wartime film, which would be Yankee Doodle Dandy. You could also do romance, obviously, you know, with a movie like Beauty and the Beast or a movie like La La Land, so that works there. You could also do gangs. Right? You could do a gangster film, right? We could have the Sharks and the Jets snapping their fingers just to coming around. You could do that as well. And also, you get a lot of films that you could actually do a horror movie that way. Little Johnny Depp singing a demon in Barber Street with Sweeney Todd. So the musical allows us the opportunity to go in a variety of different directions. Many of the early musicals kind of bridged the gap with the Western genre, especially when you had Roy Rogers. You had Oklahoma comes into mind. So we start to see that shift there. It is also an acquired taste because it tends to lean itself more closer to theater or live production. We don't see too many musicals anymore. Yes, Beauty and the Beast, there was the original cartoon version or animated version back in 1990, but then we updated it with a live action. It was still a musical at that point. So it's not necessarily a mainstream, it's still, I'm sorry, it's still a mainstream type of genre, but it's not a common genre anymore. Not too many people do that. Most of your musicals are reserved for your for the stage production, if you will. All right. Number 5. This one's gonna be it should be easy to figure out the film, but the genre is gonna be difficult. So the film is King Kong. I think we could all we've all seen that. We figured that one out. But the genre, horror. Yeah, believe it or not, horror. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, oh no, I thought it was horrible. I didn't think it was horror. But you see, horror is a different type of genre. When horror was first introduced, it was the monster movie. You had King Kong, or if you even went there, you had Bela Lugosi as Dracula, you had Lon Chaney as the Wolfman, not to mention Boris Karloff as Frankenstein. So you had a monster type movie, which made it horror. As we got into the 50s and 60s, we stayed with that a little bit more. You had movies like The Blob or something like that would come along. Eventually, you got a movie like The Stuff or The Thing, written by Stephen King. So we started to see kind of a shift in the horror genre. We also got into movies like the more of the what do they call that? The alternative lives or the alternative universe, if you will, right? The supernatural. And so we started to see films that went in that direction, Amityville Horror, and not to mention Friday the 13th. So now you've got started to get your slasher movies. So horror is the one that has probably evolved the most. Usually I show a movie called Sleepy Hollow, which I consider a gap film between the horror genre. It kind of bridges it. It starts off as a monster movie, but it does have the slasher feel, but it also has a psychological background, which a lot of the horror movies tend to do. So a paranormal film, it tries to play off of your emotions a little bit, and also maybe some of the things about, is there an alternative universe? Whereas the monster movie was really its main approach way back when. Okay. All right. The last of the genres of film is a piece of cake. I don't think anybody should get this one wrong. Right? Yep. Star Wars. We got Star Wars. So we got that one under our belt. And of course, the genre, science fiction. Absolutely. Science fiction, or sci-fi as they call, actually is probably now the largest of the American genres of films. It was usually reserved for the second run at a movie theater. Not a lot of people put a lot of money into it until George Lucas put the money into Star Wars, and then it changed everything. Star Wars became mainstream. We start to see films that kind of followed suit a little bit, And today, the science fiction genre is probably the largest of the American genres. The entire Marvel universe is science fiction. Why? Because its main characteristic is the use of science to tell the story. And so whether it's outer space, inner space, or just in some weird space, science fiction is very, very, very big. So, go into a galaxy far, far away would obviously be science fiction, but also turning the 95-pound weakling into Captain America is science fiction as well, because quite frankly, there's nobody that is as good looking as Chris Evans, but other than Chris Evans, I guess. But the idea being is that there is some element of science that is used in the film. So there is your big six, right? The gangster, the Western, the film noir, the musical, the horror, and the science fiction. Now, as you went through those and you were writing them down, you were thinking to yourself, you know what? I was thinking of some other ones. I was thinking of some other ones that were out there. And you would be right. You would be absolutely right. Because, see, there is some other elements that we would think of. We think of the comedies, and we think about the dramas, and we think about the romance. And let's not forget the action adventure, if you will, right? Now, why don't we consider those actual genres? Well, because they're too encompassing. There's too much that goes into it. A comedy, you could have all kinds of comedies, and so to say that that's just a blanket genre is difficult. Same with the drama. Every film's got some sort of drama into it, so you have a blanket look to it. So what we look at is these are universal, and so we see a film that's a Western romance or a science fiction action adventure. So we use those six major genres as a way of tying in to these four and others to make them more specific along the way. Doesn't mean that they're not important, doesn't mean they don't have great qualities to them. It just means that they're too encompassing, so we have to add an adjective to them to make them a little bit more categorized, if you will. All right, so far so good, making sense, right? Okay, so in unlike what we've had before, there's actually no videos that go with this one. We just basically put them into categories for you. And so when you look at the world of film from now on, you're going to start to put them into categories. You're going to start to think about the categories that they're in, and you may attach them along the way. So as you go forward from this point, think about what characteristics you see in those films and see if they attach into one of those six that I mentioned. Sound good? Okay. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, as always, you can send me an email, send me some sort of Canvas note, something like that. That's what I'm here for. So ask any questions. I'm more than happy to help you and point you in the right direction. Otherwise, last but not least, speaking of your grades, right? Where are most pirates' GPAs? In the high seas, matey. Anyway, let me know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we will look forward to seeing you on the pewter. See you later. Bye-bye.